Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Sustainability in Motion podcast, brought to you by ED4S. We focused on the fast-moving sustainability world to help people better understand the sustainability and environmental challenges we face. This is our first episode, so we have the whole gang here from ED4S. I'm Matt Orsagh, Chief Content Officer.
I'm Maisuradze, founder and CEO at ED4S, and I'm really excited to kick off our podcast in such a great company today.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nawar Alsaadi, CEO of Kanata Advisor and Chief Advisor to ED4S.
All right, before we start today, we'll tell you what we're up to here. We plan to alternate episodes between conversations among this group about key sustainability issues and interviews with sustainability leaders around the world. The goal of the group conversations is to have more candid conversations between three sustainability financial professionals on sustainable finance topics or developments of interest. Meanwhile, the sustainability interviews provide an opportunity for a deeper dive and more structure around a specific sustainability theme or function with an expert. Today, to start things off, we thought we'd have a little fun. It's early 2024, and on this first podcast, we're going to make three sustainability-related predictions about the coming year, and we're going to see how wildly wrong they are at the end of the year. We haven't discussed these predictions with each other, so everything each of us says will be a surprise to everyone else here. And so without any further ado, let's get things started. Maria's our CEO, so we're making her go first.
Thanks, Matt. So I don't think I can be wildly wrong with this one. This one is pretty obvious. We do have regulations that came into place in California, in Europe, CSRD, the California Climate Disclosure Act. So I think it's absolutely normal to predict that this year will be the year of implementation. So all these companies that are subject to this regulation will have to start looking at their internal operations. I think this will affect some capacity internally. We're shifting the role from sustainability officers to CFOs, moving to the finance department, and also looking at the value chain. So there'll be all kind of trickle-down effects from this regulation that will certainly make a lot of money for consulting firms as well. So this one I'm 100% sure about.
Bold prediction, more sustainability regulation. No, that makes perfect sense. I'm curious about the level of implementation around that from around the world. And this isn't one of my predictions, but I was reading that this year, about half of humanity will be voting on new leaders. I think it's just over half, in some form or another. You know, I'm in the US, there's elections here, there's elections in a lot of places around the world. And so that will be very interesting to see how those changes are married with the need for implementation of regulation.
If I can ask you, Maria, around your prediction, do you see this year as more intense in terms of regulatory implementation than what we've seen over the last couple of years? And obviously, I imagine there are differences. Maybe you're thinking around jurisdictions. Are you looking at it from maybe different areas or intensity compared to other years?
Yeah, so I think the fact that the board of directors now will be personally liable, that's a game changer in Europe. So I think that will really wake up a lot of organizations. The big firms, the big companies, publicly traded, they've been doing this work already. So a lot of them are already well on their way. I think this regulation will do is improve a lot of the disclosures that are out there. So it's not such of a big game changer for the big guys, but it is a clear a pathway for where we're actually moving, making it easier for a lot of other companies to actually get on this path. So it's going to be a hard journey, but just the fact that it is now mandated, it started from 2024, the CSRD will need to come into place. And so that means at the end of the years, these companies will need to report. So we'll see a lot of companies starting to look and ask questions, collect data, looking at solutions, consultants, technology to put this in place.
That's a good one. I think that's a solid prediction, and I don't think any chance of it being wrong by the end of the year. I'll go with mine. I'll go with my first one. I think this will be the year where sustainability funds focused on natural capital and biodiversity really take off. You know, we saw this with climate funds and funds around climate change and ETFs and other products, depending what they're called and where you live, really take off in the past, 4 or 5 years when climate change, rose to the top of people's consciousness. And I think with the things like the TNFD launching late last year, I'm seeing leading up to that, and especially after that, more interest in kind of the zeitgeist of investors in incorporating, biodiversity into the investment process. I'm not promising that it will be done well, because I think it's a learning curve for everyone. And it'll be interesting to see, because there's a lot of greenwashing around climate products, and a lot of rules came out through Europe. And there was the names rule passed in the US last year by the SEC to kind of clamp down on funds that promised to be something that they really weren't. But regardless of that, I think we'll see a lot more focus on biodiversity and natural capital. But the trick is it's much more complicated than just climate change, because you've got land systems and ocean systems and, agriculture and pesticides and chemicals and plastics and all these different issues that are not just climate. It includes climate. It's actually broader than climate. So like I said, I'm not sure it'll be done well, but I think it'll be the start of a big ramp up in those kind of investment vehicles of some sort.
That's a very interesting prediction, Matt, and I think it dovetails very well with our recently released paper on biodiversity laws. And I think there's a lot of what you were speaking about. It's something obviously we tackled this January. I'm wondering, when you're thinking about this year being the breakthrough year, are you looking at it in terms of number of funds launched, or asset under management, or media mentions? What would be your definition that this is the breakthrough year for natural capital investing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think of it as any one of those things, but kind of all of them. And I think that the that's really not the right word, but the interest has been building up over the years. Like, I wrote a paper of this when I was at CFA Institute 2 years ago, because I was seeing the interest of how to integrate, biodiversity and natural capital investment process, because I was seeing it was kind of like a 3 or 4 year lag behind climate change in people's minds, and it's following a similar process. And I think when the TNFD came out, people were already familiar with the TCFD and that framework, which the TNFD largely followed. And so this kind of gives them permission to start factoring these things into the investment process. And in some places, especially in Europe, regulations, compelling them to. And so I think, yes, you'll have more funds. You'll also have more analysts talking about it in their analyst notes. You'll hear it more probably on investor calls, probably still not much, but a little bit more. And if you track, Google searches and, mentions in the FT and the journal and all those things, I think you'll see it those places too. So it's not just funds, but it's in the consciousness of investors as well. And so much like climate, I think people will race to start something, and then over the next years, kind of figure out what works, what doesn't. And it'll be probably messy at first. And there'll probably be funds that try to get away with calling themselves, natural or biodiversity or nature-based, and they aren't, and that'll get sorted out. And I think if we're having this conversation 5 years down the road, we'll look at this time as kind of the start of that, and hopefully things will be, much more organized and better then.
So actually, that was my second prediction as well. There's going to be certainly a boom in biodiversity, and it is sad that we agree on a lot of things. I hoped we would have a little bit more of a conflict here, but a debate. So I actually had conversations with asset managers over the past few months that are thinking and exploring and launching biodiversity funds. So I think it's already in motion.
I'm sorry. Is that your second prediction though?
That was my second prediction. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So do you want to talk about it now, or save it till after Nawar goes?
No, but I mean, you said it all. Like, I'm not going to repeat things. I think it's going to happen. I guess some of the questions I wonder about are we going to see this in private equity, in public equity? And if it's in public equity, investing specifically in restoration projects, in regenerative projects, I find it a little bit difficult to picture what kind of companies would fall under this category. So I don't know if any of you have any thoughts of what kind of funds, or how could this play out in actually fund construction?
That's a great question. Like things like that, like rewilding and planting mangrove forests and kelp in the ocean and things like that. I don't know that that's really much of a public company investment process or opportunity. In some cases, it might, have small companies that have a new and novel approach to something or a new technology. But I think it's both that, and you could have things like public-private partnerships and private equity and philanthropy and a lot of different ways to do that, because yes, some of them lend themselves to the public and private markets if there's a company with a novel approach or a new business model. But to put really big money behind a rewilding program in the American West or in Canada, that's a government or a public-private partnership type of vehicle that I think would be more likely.
So that could indicate that maybe we'll have a growth in blended finance a little bit more. I think there's been a slowdown over the past years. Could this be an opportunity to ramp them up? I
wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. Well, that was a great way to get out of doing a second prediction, just saying that you agreed with someone else's prediction. I didn't think of that. Good job, Maria. But Nawar, do you want to go ahead with your first prediction?
Yeah, I'll go with my first prediction, which is in the regulatory side. And I'm going to make the kind of bold prediction that the SEC is going to actually surprise to the upside in the ambition of the climate mandate that they put out in April. And I do believe that a lot of people are reading the delay as they are in the process of watering down their proposal. But I don't necessarily see it that way. I think the reason you could potentially delay releasing a legislation is when you're trying to cover all potential arguments against it. They're trying to thread the needle and make sure they come up with a piece of regulation they can stand behind. I think the initial proposal was more ambitious than the Canadian regulation at that time. And I believe the world has moved in a direction since the SEC came with their proposal that is supportive of the direction they were going through. So recently I had a conversation with somebody who thought they're going potentially to water down the scope 3 side of it. I'm skeptical that they would. So we'll see. This is, I don't really have anything other than a gut feel that this is going to surprise. And we'll find out soon enough from the headlines once they come out, in the next few weeks.
Well, I'm happy to hear, Nawar, that you're so positive, because I think lately with all the news, it's hard to stay that optimistic. My general feeling is that we're still doing the dance of two steps forward, one step back. And I think the elections will show whether or not we're doing 2 steps back or one. But I completely agree with you with the point that, I think it's a lot about learning and discovering, and the California's disclosure rules, I think, will also enhance that capability to create a solid argument. California is like the 5th biggest economy in the world. And so if the companies are already reporting under the California climate disclosure, it's going to be a no-brainer to do it just on a federal level. So I think that makes sense. But looking forward to more backlash on that in 2024.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, Nawar. I thought of including that as one of my predictions. Not exactly what you said, but something about the SEC and it coming out. But I'm not I think my prediction would have been more about, SEC comes out with their climate rules and people shrug, because as you said, think about when the SEC first put out their proposal that they're going to do this. That was years ago. That was like 3 years ago. I may be off a little bit, but it was quite 21. A while. Almost 3 years ago. We're talking at the beginning of 2024. And the world's moved on. Regulation in Europe has moved on. California's regulation came out late last year. And for those who don't know, it covers large public and private companies, and anyone who does business in California. And as Maria said, that over a certain size, but large companies. But that covers so many companies because California is the 5th by itself.
I stand corrected. It was actually 2022. I just Googled it while we were recording.
Okay. Fact checking on the fly.
Yeah.
So about 2 years. Yeah, 2 years. And so, with what California came out, companies are going to have to report on their emissions and report on how they manage, those emissions. And so a lot of what the SEC said is already out there for public and private companies, anyone doing business in Europe and anyone doing business in California. And so that's covers, most large companies around the world. And so there was a big conversation of the SEC, whatever they do, they're going to get sued and it's going to be tied up in the courts. And that may still happen, but I don't know if that's going to matter. That's why I said shrug. It's because what they say, I don't think they can surprise us with more bold than we've seen from Europe and California. I think they may be emboldened by that and say, look, these things are already out there. We're just saying something that's in line with those. I think they'll probably still get sued because this is America and that's how we do things here. But I don't think it will be as revolutionary as it would have been if they came out with exactly what they come out with this year, 2 years ago.
So I do hear you. I don't necessarily see the SEC, getting ahead of California and the ASRS, but I do think they're going for, I would say for a regulatory body that has such deep reach within financial markets and within the psyche of investors around the world in terms of what the SEC does, requires, and dictates the direction of a lot in terms of how shareholders, investors, and corporations manage and disclose data. I think the SEC coming with something ambitious is going to raise the bar in the mainstream of finance.
That's fair.
And I think that's where it differs. It's although California is the fifth largest economy, although Europe is important, the US market is 60% of world markets, and the SEC regulates that. So I think that's why if they do surprise to the upside, this will be nothing other than a very important incremental benefit to what we're trying to accomplish in the sustainable finance realm. That's
a good one. I like it. All right, Maria, are you off the hook for your second prediction? Since you just piggybacked on mine. I don't know. I don't know if I like those. I think we should have set out rules beforehand, but we'll allow it. So I'll go on to my second prediction, and I wasn't really sure how to phrase this one, so maybe help me out with it. But I think I'll phrase it as the role of CSOs will change dramatically in 2024. Think back 5 years ago, and the title Chief Sustainability Officer was a novelty at most companies. And I think, just looked on LinkedIn and talk to people in the investment world or in the corporate world as well. And all big companies have CSOs, Chief Sustainability Officers. And I think seeing those people on LinkedIn and talking to them, they feel overwhelmed because it's usually one or two people at a company trying to do everything. And as Maria said earlier, I wouldn't be surprised if some of that work, kind of makes its way into the CFO's office and is divided into other people's work as well. Because I think what people are asking CSOs to do now is too much for your typical CSO. And I think companies are going to start realizing that, and they're either going to staff up those CSOs teams, or some of that work is going to be, handed off to other people. Both of those are good things because you have more people in the CSO's, remit and their team doing the work, or more of the company understands incorporates sustainability into what they do.
On that point, actually, I had recently a conversation with somebody, and she was mentioning that she wished that her role did not exist, in the sense that actually every department within an organization has a responsibility for some of this work. When we talk about sustainability, it's not like a side project on charity. Like, this is literally good business, and it's risk management and opportunity. So it just translates into every part of your organization. Having a central role kind of overseeing the best practices regulation is important when it actually comes down to implementation, risk analysis, opportunities, and all that. It really goes down into departments. So I think there is certainly a shift now with the regulation where at least the disclosure and reporting piece will be going to accounting departments, because that's where the disclosure usually lies. Right. But that means that all these individuals will also need to learn a little bit more about greenhouse gas accounting and all the other topics in ESG.
I think this is a very interesting prediction, Matt. I think CSOs and sustainability professionals listening to us certainly identify with what you're saying around the burden they have and the difficulty in potentially executing the many tasks that they're expected to execute. And I think actually building on this, my second prediction somehow aligns with yours or solves for it. Okay. So I'm going to jump into it because I think it builds to some extent on what you're saying. My second prediction is about AI and the role it will play in addressing the bottleneck of sustainability data and ESG kind of management overall at the corporate level and also in the investment process. I think this is going to be a marquee year in terms of solving finally this massive bottleneck we have with ESG data, not just gathering and management. Companies don't have the structures to manage ESG data. And that's a lot of the burden that CSOs and professionals this field have to deal with. They have to build everything from scratch. Often the tools are not there or the tools are not up to par or not up to standard. I think AI is going to play a role in solving that. And I've seen it. I personally talked to a lot of startups, a lot of companies who build solutions, and a lot of them are building AI tools that help professionals understand where the gaps are in their data, what patterns they need to focus on, where the issues potentially are in their supply chains. This kind of AI-driven sustainability kind of productivity solutions can reduce the burden on professionals by automating some of that job. So maybe technology will come to the rescue in that sense, but that's my prediction for this year. I think we're going to witness a plethora of new solutions and new startups focusing on solving the ESG data bottleneck through AI.
That's great. It sounds like we planned that, but we really didn't, because mine led perfectly into yours. Well, I want to be respectful of our listeners' time. I know we've gone on for a while, but I want to get to our last prediction. So, Maria, are you ready with your third prediction?
So we said the third one's going to be a bit of a wild one. On my side, it's really, again, expected, but it's a question of how fast this could happen. Biodiversity, for me, it's one of those topics, nature and biodiversity, where I think we can go much faster because we do have this track record learning from climate. And what I think is going to happen, maybe 2024 or a bit later than that, is that we're probably going to see something like ISSB S3 covering biodiversity. So it could play out as an ISSB S3, so an additional disclosure standard that clearly defines what is the governance, the strategy that needs to be put in place within corporations when it comes to nature impacts from a financial materiality point of view. So underneath the IFRS foundation, that could also play out in a way as we take that list of those indicators that SASB came up, so specific E, S, and G metrics, and we add ones on biodiversity, because so far we did have some on water, but we did not have much on nature. So actually growing that list and including specific metrics that are financially material and could be tracked by investors and the companies around biodiversity, that would be a cool thing to have next.
I like it. I don't know if I would say the ISSB will release it this year because those things take a long time. But I can definitely see something like they make an announcement in May and, they put out a proposal in June or July and they get feedback on it and something might come out next year. But I like that one. I think that's I hope that one's right. And I think it has much more chance of being right than mine. But Nawar, did you want to say anything before I go?
I'm actually not a believer that this is going to happen. I mean, I obviously would love for it to happen, don't get me wrong. Just the way that IFRS is structured, the way the ISSB focuses on financial materiality when it comes to sustainability and climate, I think the case for biodiversity and financial materiality is still emerging. In terms of how investors understand that impact on companies. So I think we are still far away from this reaching the same status as climate and other sustainability issues. And having said that, by the way, climate and biodiversity are very close. So obviously these are not mutually exclusive. If we do advance on climate, we're advancing on biodiversity as well. So I don't want our listeners to despair if this is going to take longer.
Yeah.
I'd like to counter argue, if I may. So TCFD got folded into ISSB S2. Now we do have TNFD, again, financial disclosure, right? We're talking about financial risk. We have regulations such as the European deforestation regulation, for example. So it is starting to be integrated into risk management. And I think it covers different topics, right? It's not only the Deforestation Act, but it could be impacts of climate on all the various other aspects in biodiversity. So it's, first of all, we have a long way to go, right? Coming up with those indicators, linking them to financial metrics, talking to all the players around within each one of the industries. It's a humongous work. But ISSB has been really impressive over the last few years. They've been, releasing this thing so quickly that I think with the track record on climate, I think we could be positive around this one, that maybe not released in 2024, but at least some initial steps towards normalizing, standardizing, and linking biodiversity to financial impacts will be amazing.
I think I'll split the difference between you guys. I think it will happen, but I think it will happen relatively slowly. But going back to what Nawar just said before, his second prediction, I think things like AI will help a lot in this endeavor. Think about biodiversity is much more complicated than just climate, because you've got forestry, you've got agriculture, you've got oceans, you've got all these different issues. So you're going to need a lot of expertise in these areas that isn't financial. That's from those scientists and people and ecologists in the field. But we'll see. I'm interested to see where that goes with that one. I'll go with my final one. I tried to be a little bold, a little controversial with this one. I think this could be the last COP we ever see on climate this year, COP 29. That's the bold version. The slightly less bold version of that same prediction is that this will be the peak of attendance of COP 29, of COPs and COP 29. I think there were 84,000 people who attended COP 28 last year. When you think about it, it's a event where we want to help solve climate change. And because of all the private jets that flew in, it was the largest climate event in the history of mankind because of travel and those things. And I think people are starting to realize that we don't need COPs to solve these things. They are slightly useful, but we've had 28 of them. And this was the first one where we mentioned abating fossil fuels to some extent. So the speed of change coming from COPs isn't what we need. So I think people are going to start to realize that more and more. And either after this one, they'll say, let's find a better model to do this. If you guys want to meet and have a meeting, that's fine, but this isn't really changing things at the speed it needs to. Or this will be the peak of attendance and things will kind of drop off slowly in the coming years.
I'll bounce on that because it was actually one of my thoughts as well. And I don't think it will be the last one, but I think it will be the moment where we'll need to rethink the COP process, who needs to be there, how it needs to be held. So I think it's a time to stop, pause, and redefine. And it's going to be interesting to see how the COP 15 will carry on. So the COPs on biodiversity, are we going to start a new festival here? Or is it going to move into something a little bit more productive?
Yeah, I was trying to really kind of get a sense of what he meant, Matt, by saying there will be the last COP. But I think you explained it well. I don't think COP meetings are the answer to our climate challenge, but they are part of the answer. I think a lot of organizations, institutions, players, in this kind of climate drama that's playing out, do look at the specific wording of climate statements, what global leaders are saying. It does set the tone to some extent. That's why people get disappointed when nothing really major is decided in COP. So that tells me there's some kind of expectation that COP needs to deliver. But interestingly enough, Matt, my prediction is also about COP 29. And so maybe since we're reaching toward the conclusion of this episode, let me just share my prediction, and then maybe we can continue this conversation. My prediction is that COP 29 is going to be a major disappointment. COP 28 actually surprised a lot of participants because they felt, petrostate is not going to really sponsor the, phasing out of fossil fuels or accomplish much. But I think the UAE, as a major oil producer, has something to prove. and they try to come up with something to show that they're trying to push the climate agenda in that direction. I think there's a political will within the UAE to move in the same direction as the world is moving. But I think 29 is going to disappoint, partially because it doesn't have that dynamic. And I think the other reason is I think the world economy is in potentially tough spot. And whenever the economy takes a downturn, and if it takes a deeper downturn over the next few quarters, the willingness of the world community to invest in climate, to commit to climate, to fund transition funds, to take bold steps around fossil fuel and energy kind of diminishes. So I think that might happen. And then, of course, if you mentioned elections and what happens in the U.S., if we have, unfortunately, the wrong leadership in the U.S., and it's not for me to decide what's right or wrong, but obviously there are certain political parties in the U.S. that don't want to move on the climate agenda. And if they rise to power before the upcoming COP, that would obviously also diminish the chances of a successful COP. So I wanted to end on a positive prediction, but I also wanted to be a realistic prediction. So here we are.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have to come back at the end of the year and revisit these and see how horribly wrong we got it, or how presciently right we got it. So that concludes our first episode. Thanks everyone for listening. And feel free to reach out to us and let us know topics you think we should discuss. We're all on social media. We're easy to find. Also, send us your own predictions through LinkedIn. We'll be posting this on LinkedIn and other social media platforms. So please reach out to us, communicate on this topic and others about the conversations you want to hear. Thanks for joining us, and take care.